Hello, World Singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere
Conversations.
Holy wow.
Holy wow is a great way to describe everything that we are feeling because the Cosmere drought is officially over.
Oh my God. That's my official hot take. Holy wow.
Holy wow. Done. Podcast over. We have received Dawnshard, the first Cosmere novel in a good long while.
A really long while.
And it is technically a novel. Because
yes.
What has begun as another Brandon side project. And
it's just going to be a little novella, just a short story in between.
Has turned into officially a very short novel. I believe
it's basically the shortest a novel could be.
Yeah, the cutoff is like 55,000 words, and
this
comes
60.
in at 60.
Yeah.
So it's a short novel. And we have gotten our hands on it, downloaded to our Kindles, straight from the Brandon website. We have powered through in just a couple of days of reading. We thought, there's still 10 days until Rhythm of War comes out.
Yeah, Tyler tried to tell me that we weren't going to be able to finish reading it until right before Rhythm of War. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like I could read this in a couple days. And he was like, no. We can't.
You never know how things could go. I was playing the conservative route.
I know.
And it did not need to be played because we still have 10 days to go. We know that...
well, by the time this podcast comes out, we will be at T-minus 1 week.
7 days if you are listening on the very first day this podcast is available.
Congratulations, everyone, for making it through the Cosmere drought. There were times we didn't think we would make it. We were crawling through the desert, but here we are on the other side. The oasis is in sight.
We have been avoiding spoilers of all type for Rhythm of War on this podcast. That will remain in effect for this episode. However, clearly Dawnshard spoilers are about to happen.
Them.
Yes.
All spoilers.
Consider
this whole episode.
Everything that can be possibly spoiled will be spoiled about the Greater Cosmere and Dawnshard in this episode.
Yes.
And I want that set up front.
Everything except for Rhythm of War included here.
Let's just start off with our can't wait to talk about moments. Our really just key things that made us excited from Dawnshard or something that we just need to see more of and can't wait to talk about. Brooke, what do you got?
Well, I think one of my big takeaways or something that I keep thinking about from Dawnshard is the timeliness, I feel, of this book and in particular for us as Americans, this book was released during a very long waiting period in between presidential votes being cast and counted. And it has been a period of a lot of divisiveness and strife within our country. And there were so many beautiful themes explored in this book of how to navigate differences between people, how to find your way together. And Rsyn as a merchant gives a lot of great lessons along this of empathy, her ability to put herself in the shoes of the person that she's trading with in order to find a deal, a compromise. And that deal, sometimes isn't exactly what you wanted it to be, but it satisfies both sides. And so I thought those themes just really resonated with me. Again, maybe just at this particular moment in
just
this
a first
particular
reading
place.
Kind of the feedback.
But I really enjoyed it.
The thing that most excited me about Dawnshard was the really expansive look at the greater Cosmere and the big picture stuff, where our first novella in the Stormlight Archive series, Edge Dancer, was almost more like a individual dive into one character, Lift, in that case.
Yeah, I mean, we did get the Sleepless, but
we got introductions to things.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of made it interesting.
And it opened up Rashar.
Yes.
Right, because we saw different cultures on Rashar in Edge Dancer. But I totally agree. I didn't think Dawnshard was going to be such a big leap into the greater Cosmere in such a macro way.
Exactly. I was expecting more of the micro dive, and we're going to explore Rsyn in a lot of character depth and maybe a little bit of the Lopen. He was added into the story as well. I was unprepared for how much about the greater Cosmere was going to be in this book. And I think that it's just an example of Brandon's confidence, his overall plans, and like what he is moving towards. But it's just a situation where this book is essential for understanding the greater Cosmere.
Yeah, it feels like such a big step. Like Brandon really just leaped off a cliff with this one. Did not pull any punches. Like, we are all in, going at light speed now.
And if you think about Brandon's career as a writer in the same way that people would talk about like a professional athlete, you know, whatever sport, boxing or football or whatnot, you have this period of kind of growth and potential expansion of their abilities and their skills, and, you know, all the awards that start to stack up. Brandon's already achieved that and has grown quite rapidly in his own skill set, in his popularity, and now he is more in like the elite class where just at any time you have to be worried that Brandon Sanderson could just drop amazement just down from, you know, wherever he's hanging out and just deliver a truly remarkable piece of work anytime that he steps up to the plate, anytime that he's on the field, whatever.
Anything and everything that he wants to now, and he is no longer constrained by concerns about book sales or anything like that.
Yeah, he's just doing what he wants, and he's at an elite level of doing it. And it's remarkable to see, especially in a world when we know it's probably more likely that you have an author like a George R.R. Martin or Patrick Rothfuss or even like a J.K. Rowling, where they produce something, it's great, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they can produce things forever. It's no promise. It's like you might just get the Harry Potter series. That's all. And like, that's fine. That's great. You can like that and enjoy it. But Brandon continues to show that he's at a level of just like, I can keep doing this every single day. I can just keep turning these things out. And it's remarkable as just a reader. I've never experienced anything like this.
I was talking to my dad about it today, and he was so confused. He was like, wait, how is he writing like 2 books at the same time? I was telling him how Dawnshard just came out and then Rhythm of War is coming out. And I was explaining, like, no, he's writing other books while his books are like being edited. Like, he's literally just constantly writing. And I think that is his professionalism. And like, he really, this is what he does, period. Like, he sits down and he writes every day. This is what he does.
And that's, of course, taken from other authors. As I said, it's rare, but I don't think it's never happened before. Stephen King is another like famous author who just treats it like a job.
He
shows
does his
up,
work.
Exactly. And he produces at a very high rate. And if you're into Stephen King, and you could have been a fan for the last 30 plus years, that's something similar that we're talking about, is that Sanderson's at this elite stage where you could conceivably imagine now that he just does whatever he wants for the next decade or two. And I'm super excited for it. Now that we have really just talked about Brandon Sanderson the whole time, let's talk about Dawnshard itself, because it introduces a lot of characters, some that we know, some that have just been, barely introduced or mentioned. And I think that the best thing we could do is start off with a quick conversation about the characters and then dive into like our favorite moments or the important aspects of Dawnshard that we want to take out from the story.
Yeah, I think that was another really cool thing about this book that contrasts it from Edge Dancer. Again, Edge Dancer was more of a really specific look at just Lift, right? And
Wendell, I guess, but that's really the only other aspect.
Yeah, it wasn't very wide. Whereas this book, I love that we got more information, like you said, about a bunch of smaller characters that we have seen but didn't have very much info about. I like that we kind of got them all together in a room and then got to get to know each of them better. Starting with Rsyn, who we've seen in 3 interludes thus far. So, we had a good background on her character. She is the partially paralyzed, now master trader, recently gifted the most up-to-date, technologically fancy ship from her previous master.
Which goes by the name Wandersail, which of course is one of the stories that Hoyd Wit tells to Kaladin in the early books.
I do wonder if that is going to become more salient.
I think it
moving
will.
Forward.
As if Rsyn is very salient now and will only become more salient over time. I think that there is, let's hold off on deep speculation before we just kind of get through our character lists, because Rsyn is definitely the main character of the story, but it is supplemented and I definitely think added to by the presence of the Lopen.
The Lopen.
Who at the time of Dawnshard, when it begins, is a second ideal Windrunner. He has his own spren that he has bonded. It presents as male, named Rua, R-U-A, and they have a super great relationship that is
very interesting,
on display throughout this story, and it really just continues to add, I think, what you were saying about the depth of just like, okay, the Lopen is a character, but we know that Syl is a fully realized character that we have a lot of like personal connection to. Well, that means that Rua is the same way to the Lopen. Like, Rua has thoughts, Rua has opinions, Rua is like Syl, a honor spren in Shadesmar. So like there's a lot of complexities going on with Rua, and it's just dabbled with in this story. But I do think it's important to remember that like our spren characters are characters as well.
Then we have, of course, Cheery Cheery, our maybe kind of a dragon friend of Rsyn.
Definitely seems to be the cover, and the chapter images are made up of a Cheery Cheery figure.
A little Larkin.
Yes. And we learn so much about Cheery Cheery and the Larkins overall. I think that clearly there was speculation as recently as our last episode that Cheery Cheery was a more traditional dragon in the most kind of iconic sense, like a Smaug-esque dragon or a Game of Thrones-esque dragon. And we believe that is because dragons do exist in the Cosmere, as Frost is our biggest example. It would seem, though, after Dawnshard, that we can at least update that Cheery Cheery is probably Risharian based.
Yes, Larkins in general, they are related to another species called the Lanceren, singularly known as a Lancer. And they, in world, are thought to be native to Amia. So, whether we can actually believe that or not, that is in-world
the most
knowledge.
Evidence we have right now.
Yeah, people who live on Rishar say that Lancers are native to Amia.
And they have the visual similarities. Our good friend Angie reminded us that the crab looking things are probably the things that are native to Rashar. Like if it's got some carapace and looks kind of crab-like, then it has a high likelihood of being native to Rashar.
I still think that Larkins and Lancerin may be related to Yolan dragons.
I do want to keep
like
that
cousins or something.
I think that the connection is made most clearly when the Amians are talking about Cherry and the guardians of the ancient sins and how they are only, everyone is like replacing someone else, in that the Amians are replacing the guardians, who Cherry is one of. You could conceivably say that Cherry is maybe replacing the actual first thing, which was the Frost-style Yolan dragons.
I would like chalk it more up to like evolution. If dragons came to Rashar way back,
Cherry
and then over time mutated enough that they are now like a cousin species known as Lancers.
Both of those things make sense to me. We know that would be like, that's exactly what happens. The theory of evolution is exactly what you just described.
And I mean, we're talking about such a long timeline when we're talking about the Cosmere and Rashar, that things like evolution are going to come into play.
We will talk more about Cherry in detail and the bonding and her story. So let's...
More to come.
Scoot on over to, or crab walk on over to our Amian friend, who is introduced early on in Dawnshard as Neekly.
I totally should have anticipated there being
an Amian spy.
Yes. This book like really kind of took me off guard. I think because we've been in a Cosmere drought for so long, and I've been like trying not to think about it and like trying not to be overly excited and things like that. That one, I totally forgot that in this book, Rsyn was going to be going to Amia. Frickin' Amia. I would have been so excited if I had remembered that. And then totally forgot about the interlude from Oathbringer about the party that goes to Amia, and like should have been expecting all of these things. I'm kind of glad that I wasn't, because it took me by surprise, which was a great discovery. Yeah. But I was shocked when I realized that Neekly was a sleepless.
Now, lots of names. Clearly, we have Neekly, who he goes by when he's passing as a human. Longer name that is used when he is among other Amians is Neeklia Sorm, which I'm not going to pretend that I can pronounce that correctly. But importantly, he is labeled the 24th youngest of the swarms. So Neeklia Sorm, I don't know. He is the youngest of the Amian swarms.
He is therefore the best at imitating humans.
And I found that where our other very ancient kind of mutating or shifting creature that we've seen in the Cosmere are the Kandra, and they also have this kind of generation thing where like you're born in one generation, the first, the second, the third, and there's like a hierarchy. It seems like the Amians have a similar thing, but they don't disrespect the youngers.
Yeah,
Neeklia
I thought
Sorm
that was
actually
really
is
cool.
he's very respected because of his
youth. Yeah, and they're kind of like, we should actually listen to him. He is more connected to
the people who exist
humans
now.
And like, yeah, he has some valuable perspective that we can take advantage of. So refreshing.
It was quite nice to hear just like, oh yes, you both respect the elders because the elders should respect the skills of the youth. Like it's not just a one-way street.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be back in
That's great.
Who would have thought? Normal people, that's who. Neekly, for example, likes humans, enjoys the company of Rsyn and all of the sailors, specifically mentions that he likes Dalinar, even though he believes that Dalinar, the bondsmith, will destroy Amiens or Amia or everyone. I'm not really sure.
We'll
it's just
get into it.
Yeah, exactly. Neekly is the one who is eventually going to be in the final negotiation with Rsyn, and so plays a major role, even though part of that is deception, comes to be, one of the key figures of the book, and probably the most important Amian that we know of now, with the exception of maybe Arklow.
I'm assuming we'll see more of really all of
these
the
characters.
Sleepless. Yeah. And then we also have Cord, Rock's daughter.
Probably the biggest surprise of Dawnshard in terms of like what I wasn't expecting and then happened.
Totally. Yeah. I kind of had to like remind myself. I was like, wait, this is Rock's daughter, right? Am I like remembering that correctly? Because we really only meet her. Like she's just introduced, hi, this is my daughter, Cord. And that's it. And then she shows up on this expedition. She's brought along because she is gifted with the sight, the ability to see Spren, like her father. And I find her character development throughout this book really interesting. She is a very different female character than we have seen so far on Rashar, and it's really refreshing.
I think that there's a lot of potential with Cord, especially because by the end she's a shard bearer.
Seems like she's gonna have a really cool story.
Yeah, she's a shard bearer. She can see Spren. She is very interconnected to Rock's storyline and has given us a lot of information about Rock's storyline. So very excited that Cord made the cut as one of these key Dawnshard characters.
We also have Lopen's cousin, Huio, who is on the expedition with him. He achieves the third ideal before Lopen, which is hilarious.
We also have Captain Drowan. Not going to pretend that
Who knows how to say that? There are basically only consonants in this word.
However, her role is very interesting as the captain of the ship. She has a really like influential role and kind of a back and forth with Rsyn, and there is power dynamics at play. I definitely think she's going to be a continued presence in Rsyn's life. So every time we get Rsyn, we'll keep getting the captain as well, because I think that the captain is bound to the ship in the same way that Rsyn now is. So I just believe that like every time we see Rsyn, we will also be seeing Captain Drowan.
Okay. And then lastly, we have Rushu. I was pretty excited to see Rushu here. She's another one that like we have just heard Navani reference to or like speak to a couple of times in regards to some experiments and stuff that they're doing with Fabrials. She is on the expedition and we get a little bit more of her character, her research and knowledge about Spren and Fabrials, which is awesome.
She was actually sent by Navani with the promise of creating a kind of floating chair for Rsyn, or at least playing around.
Well, not really a promise. Yeah, she's just like, we'll show you what we know so far.
Exactly. And I think that this invention that she is a key part in is going to be important to the greater Cosmere, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I don't want us to forget, though he's only mentioned, not actually apparent in the story, is Vistim, who is now the trade master of trade of Thalena, and was once Rsyn's mentor, is the owner and main investor in the Wandersail and everything Rsyn does. So he's probably not long for this world. However, I mean, he's just, old and kind of sickly and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
So I think Rsyn is obviously building up to like replace him in the future.
I mean, I don't think Rsyn is going to go into politics like Vistim.
Just as master of trade, I could see that as like a long distant future.
After the jump. Rsyn has like a better, cooler path ahead of her. There's no need why she needs to follow in Vistim's footsteps.
Let's talk about our 5 favorite moments, character quotes, scenes Dawnshard provided a bunch in a relatively small package that I was just like, this is iconic. This is amazing. And we learn so many different aspects of Risharian lore, Cosmere important, significant stuff, and then just great character moments as well.
Yeah, to start with something small, one of the first things that just made me go is that Navani for the first time is referred to as the Queen of Urithiru, which I thought was just a cool moment to see her like presented with her official title, Queen Navani. And then later, she is also called the Mother of Machines, which is just a fucking sweet name.
That's how the Amians refer to her. That's
Yeah.
Nickley is calling her the Mother of Machines.
They're like, oh yeah, the Mother of Machines. Yeah, we know her.
So Navani Kholin is stacking up titles just like another queen that we knew.
She's such a baller. I love Navani.
I think that clearly the maybe just like position that Navani was placed in near the end of the last book, where she was like, you know, a key member of the greater coalition, definitely stepping up for Dalinar, but also like playing a key role even in the early negotiations, and with like the Azish, it was, you know, one of her letters and essays that won them over. So like she has just had a long run, and now it is as if everyone else has realized how awesome and important Navani Kholin is. One of the most important aspects from the book Dawnshard is the question, what is a Dawnshard?
Ooh, we're just going to dive right in?
There's no point. We're like 30 minutes into this podcast, so we have had plenty of time to whet the palate and to get people interested. If you're still here, we love it. Now we're diving deep.
All right, let's go.
Because what is a Dawnshard? In this book, Rsyn says what I think like fans had done and Brandon had recognized that they'd done. She says, I have definitely heard of Dawnshards before, but in my head related them to the honor blades.
Yeah, she's like, I thought it was a weapon. I just thought it was like basically an honor blade.
I
definitely thought also.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I think Brandon just watched us all and he was like, oh, you guys are dumb. I need to spell this out a little more clear about. Yeah. The Dawnshards are something heretofore unseen.
I do think, okay, I want to start with what we knew or what we heard about Dawnshards prior to this book, and then add on what we learn about them in this book.
Sounds great. So tell us, what did we know about Dawnshards coming into this story? You want to go to the original, The Way of Kings?
Yeah, going all the way back to The Way of Kings, there is an epigraph that says, quote, taking the Dawnshard, known to bind any creature voidish or mortal, he crawled up the steps crafted for heralds, 10 strides tall apiece, towards the grand temple above. And that is a quote from the poem of Ista. I believe this is a note from Yasna in one of her notebooks, and she says about this, I have no modern explanation of what these Dawnshards are. They seem ignored by scholars, though talk of them was obviously prevalent among those recording the early mythologies. End quote.
And then we have, I believe from Oathbringer, the quote regarding how Honor felt about Dawnshards. In Honor's final days, he was raving, that's the word that was used, to the Knights Radiant about the Dawnshards and claimed that they would one day destroy Rishar as their ancestors had destroyed Ashen. Right there, a whole bunch of reasons to be real worried about the Dawnshard.
But then he also is like worried in Dalinar's visions that humanity like won't survive without the Dawnshards. He makes some comment like, I don't know what you're going to do now that we don't have the Dawnshards, or now that they're lost, or something like that.
What about some Brandon words and remarks on the Dawnshards?
Yes, some official words of Brandon, again, from before Dawnshard came out. Someone asked Brandon to write in his book when he was signing something about the Dawnshards that we didn't currently know. And Brandon said that one Dawnshard is different from all the rest. So just file that away in your little Dawnshard memory bank. Keep
we don't
that
know
in mind.
if this is the Dawnshard that is different from the rest.
We have no idea. But there's one that's different from the rest. Another person asked Brandon to write in their book something about, they said, quote, that opposing force, end quote, meaning the opposite of ad nauseam, essentially, which we really don't know anything about. And Brandon's answer was that there was a weapon created by the opposition of ad nauseam. So presumably that weapon is the thing that the now vessels used to destroy ad nauseam, but who knows?
Yeah, it could have been the key thing or just a thing that led to another thing that eventually set up the vessels. We don't have enough other than this one fan who like snuck in a little bit.
Good question.
It's always, how can you trick Brandon? That's basically...
Then we get into the wealth of information that we learn about the Dawnshards much more concretely in the book Dawnshard.
So I think the first thing that should be talked about or mentioned is that the Dawnshard is best described probably as a force. We don't know the full extent of that force, but it is not like a stone or a rock or anything.
Yeah, it's not a sword.
Yeah, exactly. So don't think of it as something that is physical in its primary essence. I just kind of consider it a force. And when we first are introduced to it, it is inside of a painting, a mural. So it's a force inside of a mural.
So clear cut. The mural is one interesting because it depicts the shattering of ad nauseam, which is not really something that we have seen so concretely on any shard world heretofore. There are very few characters or entities that are Cosmere aware enough to have created art about the shattering of ad nauseam. So that's interesting. And it depicts ad nauseam as the sun that is broken into 4 pieces. And each one of those pieces is broken into 4 pieces. So obviously that makes 16.
16.
But I think it's interesting that it's 4 sets of 4, right? Not just 16 different pieces. 4 sets of 4, which is very similar to the way that the metallic arts charts and like relationships are set up.
Yeah.
And then it also makes me wonder if the shards themselves fall into categories sort of like that. Like, is there a set of 4 shards that sort of go together in similar intents, or like, do they fall under a unified umbrella?
Yeah. Not saying this is accurate, but do something like honor, cultivation, ruin, preservation all go together under one category?
Right. That is, that would have its own sort of name or intent if you put them all together.
We clearly do not have the answer to that question because
just a thought.
It's clearly just introducing a bunch of different thoughts that we have from Dawnshard. That's all we're doing.
And in relationship to sort of like the number of shards and the relationship to the metals, Rsyn says, like, as she's sort of mesmerized by this painting and the Dawnshard in the painting, she's counting the shards in her mind, quote, over and over, feeling a reverence to the number, end quote.
And then another quote from Rsyn about the feeling or the power of this Dawnshard force. She says, quote, she felt something emanating from it. Resignation, confidence, understanding, end quote.
Yeah, I think that is significant in some way. I don't know how yet, but I think that like the feeling that she gets from it means something.
Yeah, it's somehow connected to intent, I would guess.
Yes. And then we find out what the actual intent of that Dawnshard is. First, it's a little bit more nebulous. She sort of like hears this voice in her mind saying, quote, accept it, know it, change, end quote. And I thought it was like interesting and notable that the Dawnshard could not possess her until she accepts it. There's like a pause where it's waiting for her to consent. And after she says yes, then it like possesses her. I just thought that was interesting. It didn't just like take her over.
Yeah.
It like
has a little bit of vampire
permission.
vibes.
Yeah, exactly. You had to invite it into the house.
After she invites it into the house, which is her body and mind, she says, quote, storms, she thought, what have I done? What you needed to, another part of her thought. You have adapted. You have remade yourself. It was then that she grasped in the smallest way the nature of the command inside her, the will of a god to remake things, to demand they be better, the power to change, end quote. So she's having this now internal dialogue, not altogether different from maybe what everyone has, but her internal dialogue has become very segmented.
It's written like a normal talking to yourself in your mind kind of thing, but I do not think that it is.
Yeah. And
she has a foreign
entity,
consciousness
yes,
inside of her.
Yeah, a force. I mean,
consciousness might be strong, but
yeah,
like,
and I said entity. I feel like that's also
something that
strong.
is clearly not her.
Yes, 100%.
Not even a different part of her. Like, it's a completely different thing. But I have so much to say about this. I'm so excited. I think it's super interesting that the intent of this Dawnshard is change. And it really struck me in particular because after our last episode, we asked podcast fans to tell us what they thought a combination of honor, cultivation, and odium would be, similar to ruin, preservation equals harmony. We wanted your thoughts about what these three would be if they all came together in a speculative scenario where maybe Dalinar takes all three of them. And one that I really loved was from Tim. He said, quote, the combo of the three shards is evolution, the bonds that connect everything, the cruelness / fury of nature, the ever-changing, ever-growing. Admittedly, this is kind of boring, but the three together seem to represent the change in species, end quote. And so that like really, sounds kind of like this Dawnshard, the sort of primal ability to, again, change a species or like evolution over time on a really grand macro scale.
And I want to come back to what Neekly specifically said. Clearly, as a representative of the Amians, he's one of the older and more knowledgeable characters. Having said that, probably everything that he says is wrong and not actually fully accurate. But Neekly describes the Dawnshard as, quote, the most powerful forms of surge binding transcend traditional mortal understanding, Neekly said. All their greatest applications require intent and a command. Demands on a level no person could ever manage alone. To make such commands, one must have the reasoning, the breadth of understanding of a deity. And so, the Dawnshards, the four primal commands that created all things. He paused, and then eventually they were used to undo ad nauseam itself. End quote. So the Dawnshards are the key thing to understanding ad nauseam's end. We don't know how that they line up that way, but like, this is the most important thing.
Yeah, this is the biggest thing. There are 4 of them, so like that's good to know. Obviously, we already said one of them is different than the other 3. We don't know which one. I am thinking of this and sort of like placing it into the Cosmere and Rsyn mythology in like a Rhea and Kronos sort of place. The power that existed before there was God, basically just like time, space, earth, change, right? Like the very, very fundamental and huge powers that make everything before there is God.
100%. I mean, if you think about the shards, most of them are pretty complicated. Honor, passion /
Right.
Odium.
They're all much more like humanistic qualities that are closer to us than they are to, the universe.
So basically, in your comparison to the Greek pantheon, you would see our shards as like the traditional Greek gods.
Yes.
The golden era of the gods.
Yeah,
But
right. You have like war, lust,
Yes.
beauty, honor, communication.
Are like your Zeus, Aphrodite.
Yeah.
And these primal Dawnshards may be the forces or powers that come before the shards as we know them.
Yes.
I think that we can clearly say that if they existed and created all things, and then eventually they were used to undo Ad Nauseam itself, they're definitely right now the oldest thing that we know about in the Cosmere.
Yeah.
And like the most foundational thing in the Cosmere. So nothing at all close to an honor blade. Like an honor blade is a child's toy compared to the Dawnshards. And so it would totally make sense if honor, if we were to believe that honor was worried and nervous about the both power of a Dawnshard and what not having a Dawnshard or the Dawnshards would mean.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we don't really want these like things to be used as toys in the hands of mortals because they are well beyond, as Nickley says here, well beyond the understanding or usage of mere humans. But they're also maybe the only thing that we can use to destroy a shard. They're probably the only thing that could have been used to shatter Ad Nauseam. So like, what are you going to do to kill a god?
I think that could be why Dawnshard is necessary and essential to not just Rashar and the Stormlight Archive, but the greater Cosmere as well.
Everything. It just like blows it wide open.
Now, Rsyn herself, after she has accepted the Dawnshard, and she describes it as a pressure, a command, and that idea of just, okay, if it is, as Nickley describes, a command from a deity or a god, but it's older and more powerful, or at least older and more ancient and primal than the gods that we know as the shards. Like, who gave this intent? Who gave this command? What gave this command?
Nothing.
Yeah.
That's like my point, is that like
this
it is
the
not
out of nothing came these primal Dawnshards.
Yeah, basically, like they are not an intent as we think of them as like the shards, because again, they are not in relation to humans, and us being humans, we think of everything in relation to us. But I think that these are like it's less of a command as we would think of it being like, because a command, that word necessitates a person giving a command. I am thinking of them more as like a universal imperative.
Well, yes. I mean, in our universe, we would have something maybe akin to saying entropy. Entropy is just the idea that everything is moving from a state of order to chaos.
Yeah. And it's like not, there is nothing that is like forcing that to happen or commanding that to happen. It just is.
Yeah.
That's how I think of these Dawnshards. So when like Rsyn is feeling this command, it is just an imperative of the universe that everything will change, period. Like change exists. Nothing has to cause it or like make it happen. It just is.
At least in this universe. Maybe there's different universes where they have different primal surges.
Maybe.
Primal orders.
Yeah.
Now we're getting too meta. Let's stay on point, because Rsyn actually clearly articulates at the very end of this book some changes that she experiences.
Before we get there, I have so many questions about what it means that Rsyn is now a Dawnshard.
Yeah, we don't have the
Because
answers to this.
if it's even at least a little bit similar to a vessel taking a shard, she will be completely transformed and subsumed in the intent of the Dawnshard. Like, she will just become the force of change. Like, is she still Rsyn? I don't know if I can trust her anymore. I'm very interested to see what specifically happens with Rsyn and like how she is changed and or corrupted by this event.
What you just described is what I would say is probably the key takeaway. I have a couple of these laid out, but the key takeaway of Dawnshard for me is that Rsyn is now the most important person on Rashar and maybe one of the most important people in the Cosmere.
100.
Because what exactly as you just laid out, she is comparable to either a herald or a shard or something bigger and more important than a herald or a shard.
Yeah, exactly. I would say she's well above a herald. Heralds are freaking child's play.
Yeah, because they're limited and they are Rasharian in nature. Dawnshards are clearly bigger than that.
Heralds only exist because of the shards.
I agree.
So she is much more like a shard, presumably, not exactly the same. But again, if it's anything similar, she will be, Rsyn the person will be completely subsumed into the intent of this Dawnshard.
And we see that happening with Zazed, the person becoming Harmony. He's also losing aspects of what made him a person.
And we hear about that in relationship to Odium too and Rasa.
We don't know this for a fact. Clearly,
no,
we are
I am
speculating.
Just speculating.
But I would definitely say that Rsyn is now one of the most important people in the Cosmere. And whatever role, maybe it's just mentions in Rhythm of War, maybe she has a whole nother interlude that's going to be part of that story.
I would assume we're going to see a lot more of her.
I could see her taking a book off if like Brandon planned this out to do a Dawnshard because he's not going to have any Rsyn, but Rsyn's important to understanding. So
or maybe just like one small interlude, where like not too much happens. It's just like checking in with Rsyn, whereas in Oathbringer she got like a super significant interlude.
I could see it basically going either way, that Rsyn's going to only become more important, or if she's going to kind of take a book off because she got her own.
I could see her really coming to the forefront in the
Book
second
5.
half.
Oh, yeah.
No, yeah, 6 through 10.
Got it. Yeah, 100%. I feel like that is the period when Rsyn is going to be the most important, is second half Stormlight Archive.
But to bring it more back down to Rashar, there are some literal physical like human changes that happen to her after taking on the Dawnshard, which are very familiar phenomena, such as colors appearing brighter and people's voices sounding more musical.
It is clearly, well, to the Cosmere aware, it clearly feels like a connection directly to the heightenings of Nalthis.
Yeah, it just screams awakening and breath, which I am fascinated but also very confused by.
I think that this is one of the big questions that like Brandon is putting this in the book for a reason. It's meant to do this and like force us to have this kind of thought process of like, what does that mean? Is it the same as what's on Nalthis? Is it different than what's on Nalthis? Does it have nothing to do with it at all?
Why does a Dawnshard have an effect similar to a magic system on a different planet, even though she's still on Rashar? And we don't really, I don't know. It does mean that all of the Dawnshards have this effect, or is it like only this specific Dawnshard manifests in this way?
Way. One of the things that struck me about the descriptions that Rsyn makes at the end of Dawnshard are how close it seems to different heightenings that we see on Nalthis. Now, the heightenings are broken down 1 through 10. I don't want to go through all of them, but the ones that Rsyn specifically remarks on, she says kind of that she has perfect pitch because people's voices sound more like melody.
Yeah.
And so that's the second heightening, grants perfect pitch. The first heightening is aura recognition, which is kind of like the ability to life sense or breath sense.
Well,
in a way.
It's more like you can tell if someone's invested or not.
Yeah. And then the third heightening, which Rsyn also remarks on, is about perfect color recognition and be able to instantly determine the exact shades of color. And Rsyn says that everything looks brighter and deeper in color.
But it's also important to note that there is space in between the heightenings. So
yes.
Each and every breath you gain, you increase your color perception by a little bit. It's not like you only get one level of color recognition at the third heightening. So even people who only have one breath or
are
two
slightly
breaths,
better, yeah,
have slightly better color perception than having one breath or no breaths.
Now, from what I read and what I understand, that's all that Rsyn maybe mentioned. However, I have a theory that this is kind of connected to the divine breaths that the returned get. So stay with me here, because a divine breath is equal to the fifth heightening. All returned get one divine breath, and that is equal to the fifth heightening. So we've already described the first three. The fourth heightening grants perfect life sense. This is the more accurate thing that I was saying before. But that is the ability to instinctively sense other people around you. And then the fifth heightening grants agelessness and basically a resistance to diseases or the normal types of agings. Now, a fifth heightening breath from endowment, making someone on Nalthis a returned, is considered a splinter. It is endowment splintering off part of her innate power and giving it to a mortal on Nalthis. That turns them into a returned and automatically gives them the fifth heightening. Now, if a Dawnshard is capable of bestowing similar powers, my theory is that it's acting in a way that's basically the same as a splinter of a shard and a splinter of endowment in this case. I simply think that if you are holding something like the Dawnshard, you are going to have a similar impact to like a splinter or fifth heightening. That it's not just this Dawnshard. I think that's just like an object of, not even an object. It's just a force of power, and power in one way demonstrates itself through perfect pitch, perfect color, and is not directly Nalthinian in a way.
You would certainly expect it to change someone, of course. Yeah, I guess I just want there to be a reason why it is manifesting in exactly the same way as the investiture on a different planet. But I also don't really think that she has an equivalent of the fifth heightening. Like, I feel like the way that she describes it, at least thus far, is more like she gained a couple extra breaths and like things are a little bit brighter, things are a little bit more musical, but we don't have any evidence that she has life sense, and we don't have any evidence yet that she has gained any kind of agelessness. Maybe we'll discover that in the future.
Totally. And I agree that like the only things that she's even hinted at, and it may be what you're saying is just like, even if it's hinting at it, it's not the same thing. It's not an equivalent power level. She doesn't necessarily have breath that she can use like magic.
Yeah.
But she's hinted at least at things in the first, second, and third heightenings. And so very interested to see how that develops.
Very interested.
And if she becomes, more equipped basically as a magic user, like a separate force
what
entirely.
Other abilities is she going to gain?
Yes.
And again, like, how is she going to change? Will the person Rsyn start to disappear?
Okay, I think that's probably the biggest and nerdiest aspect of Dawnshard. We just dove right into the philosophy. But there are also great character moments. You've already mentioned Cord, and I want to return to her because not only does she have a good arc going from, basically just a remarked upon, barely mentioned. Yeah, exactly. And then becoming a shard bearer and possible protector of the Dawnshard by the end.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that.
Yes. But clearly another character of importance. Anyone who's a shard bearer on Rashar is important, but Cord is also the daughter of Rock, and in her conversations, we learn a bunch about Rock.
A ton of information about Rock. It's very interesting. I just want to like sit down with her and be like, so Cord, tell me about your father. And she's like more than happy to do so. She's like, well, let me tell you about my dad. I have some qualms with him.
Where Rock is very like reserved and doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah, closed-lipped.
Cord is basically just like at all times. I mean, sometimes just declaring things.
Yeah, she's just always randomly like, well, my dad. And you're like, wow, you're just going to volunteer information about your father? Okay.
It seems, though, like her father is pretty cool. He's got a bunch of stuff going on. They both share the ability to see Spren. That is considered to be rare among the people, the Amians. They consider that these seers, these people who are able to see Spren.
People with the sight.
Yeah. They consider them to be rare and like remark that they don't really want to kill Cord specifically. Other humans, no big deal really. Like half the Amians are arguing to kill all the humans, but everyone is like, we don't want to kill Cord. Cord's like, kind of cool.
They say it's hard to kill Knights Radiant and it's even harder to kill one of the sighted. I'm assuming because both of those groups of people have some kind of deeper relationship with the Spren.
Yes, I think so. But then what Cord offers about her father is just adding fuel to the rock fire. She says that her father was blessed by the Spren in a way that even she was not. So like she has a kind of cool sight, but her father was even more blessed by the Spren. Specifically, they strengthened his arm as he pulled the bow of hours. That's direct quote, the bow of hours. And we've previously talked about the shard bow pulling moment from the end of Oathbringer, speculating that maybe this was an example of Rock being a stone ward. And
now it sounds like it's something completely
different. Now it's just like, is he best friends with Spren and they're just doing all the work for him? Are they actually strengthening his muscles, which is something we've talked about before, not being done by like windrunners?
I would assume that it's the same type of thing that would happen if he were becoming a stone ward, but he like doesn't have to create a bond in order for the Spren to do it. They're just like, yeah, we'll do that for you. We like you, Rock.
Yeah, it's more like a friendly cooperation for a moment.
Yeah, you don't have to like sign a contract and make a pact. She also gives him a title, which we only hear in the Horneater language, and I'm not even going to try to say it, but she says her dad's Horneater name, comma, the something Horneater, comma, he who drew the bow of hours at the dawn of the new millennium, heralding the years of change, end quote.
So Rock is like a mythical figure.
Yeah. I mean, he has some special title, the something. Okay. We don't know what it is.
We can't just say the something. This is an auditory medium. I'm going to do it.
You're going to.
And then everyone else will make fun of me and they won't make fun of you, Brooke. So here it is. Rock's title that Cord gives him is Fal Allah Liki Nur. Fal Allah Liki Nur. That's what I'm going with.
Not too bad.
It is he who drew the bow of hours at the dawn of the new millennium, heralding the years of change, is the end of the quote. What? What did Rock do? And then the most important thing is that Cord says that Rock is in a position now where he wants to go back to the Horneater Peak so he can face judgment for the thing that he did. Why does he have to face anyone's judgment?
But also apparently like he is supposed to be fighting and he is like refusing to fight, and so she's mad at him for that.
There's just so much alluded to about Rock, and because of our previous speculation about him, it just seems like Rock is just the endless depths, and they just keep on going
mystery.
down. Yeah, they just every time you look at Rock, it's just like more and more mystery added on top of him.
Very much the strong and silent type. In terms of Cord, like moving forward in her own personal storyline, she is very committed to fighting and sort of like fixing the honor of her family, or like making up for her father's unwillingness to fight. She wants to find shards for her people and use them to fight when her father will not. And she's a very confident and assertive woman. Even when the Sleepless tell her that she has taken the shard plate that is like reserved for the guardians of the Dawnshard, she's like, I mean, I'll think about it and get back to you. I have some other things that I'd like to do.
Okay, do you want to run through a couple of other key things and kind of do these as like rapid fire mentions?
Okay, yeah, because there is so much.
There is a lot, but it's also, you know, just things that are interesting, but we don't have a bunch
lot to say about them. Yeah, just like things to pull out and keep in mind for the future.
Okay. In the early part of the book, when Lopen is still at Urithiru, he, in what I'm guessing will actually be a moment that's crossed over in Rhythm of War, that we'll see this from a different person's perspective.
I like that.
He meets a Reshi prince's entourage and like all the different people who show up, and the prince is Talik, who we have met before in Rsyn's interlude. And one of the things that the Lopen does is he flies Talik up real high, and they have a super sweet conversation where a secret is unveiled. A secret that Lopen will not even tell Kaladin about, because that would be violating the man's trust, and he wouldn't do that.
Great, yeah.
But we know what the secret is. And what is the secret about Talik?
Talik confides in Lopen that his mother, the Reshi king, is bonding a Dustbringer spren. And he says, quote, he can make the very air seem to catch flame, and sees a spren that burns through the inside of objects in curious tree-like patterns, end quote.
And Lopen specifically says, well, make sure you don't talk to the other Dustbringers. Yeah. Why don't you just come straight to Dalinar and the Windbrenners?
We would like to have your Dustbringer, just keep her away from the other ones.
Clearly, we've already set up that conflict with Malada and maybe even more of the Knights Radiant as they appear in Rhythm of War.
We get a bunch of new information about Spren and Fabrial technologies, mostly through Rushu. Rushu at one point mentions that she was distracted by reading, quote, a new report on the curious interaction between Flame Spren and Logic Spren, end quote.
Don't know why.
Fascinating. Need to know more about that. What could that be?
She also said, quote, Spren, it should be noted, have a curious relationship to our perception of them and their motions. You see both of these hoops in the same frame of reference, so they act together. It's why the motion and curve of the planet don't influence span read. It's proven impossible for someone on a ship with the span read to see themselves in the same frame of reference as the person receiving the communication, end quote. Now
I thought that was super interesting, blew my mind, and I don't completely understand it. It's very scholarly.
It's a little bit scholarly, but it also lines up perfectly with what we know about how investiture works on Cell, specifically with our girl Shy. Because Shy is a person who can not only imagine, but shift her personality to become different things through the power that exists on Cell and that stamping art that she uses. I think that this is all about intent and the same kind of aspects of a cognitive realm where, you know, the more you think about anxiety or what you feel anxiety about, the more anxiety spren are going to exist, or fear spren or whatever. You kind of are manifesting the thing that you are in, or how, what Rushu is saying, how you are in reference to someone or something else. So someone who is normal thinks of themselves as on a ship, being separate and segmented from the person, that the span read is connecting to. They can't see themselves as the same thing. I'm wondering if you can break that if you are a strong enough person or have, some skills in changing your perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't quite track that through, but I'm interested to hear more about, how this all plays together.
For sure.
Now, because we are on a Phelan merchant ship, we hear a little bit more about the passions, which I am super interested in relationship to odium and like potential previous worship of odium. I don't know, there's something there. There's one quote, "The passions, it was said, changed the world," end quote. So some sort of concept of like being able to literally physically transform the world around you from the passions in some way, possibly a reference to a form of magic that is coming through odium. And then, quote, "The men dream terrible dreams full of premonitions, and their dread passion creates omens," end quote. Interesting because it's referencing future sight, premonitions, and their ability to, again, like manifest those physically in some way.
Yeah, and clearly on the ship in the early part of the book when they are traveling, it's all about different omens that they are coming across and what is Rsyn doing to fix those omens or correct those omens, and eventually the mystery about who, Nikli, is causing those omens.
Obviously, we see that these quote-unquote omens are not, anything superstitious. They are created by someone.
Well,
but I think
what you're saying,
going back to there being a seed of truth in sort of everything that's presented, there's something to this idea.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying a moment ago about Shy and the kind of perspective that you have. Like, there is a key aspect across the Cosmere about manifesting and creating something from your thoughts. And so, like, yes, I totally agree that the passions and these premonitions, these different fears that these sailors have, all of those things are also manifesting in the real world.
Yeah, and to an idea we've talked about here before in relation to future sight in the Cosmere, this is sort of an example of you quote unquote see the future in your dreams, but then having seen that future, that makes you behave differently in the world and possibly creates a different outcome.
Let's talk a little bit about the Sleepless, because Sleepless / the Amians,
/ the gods who sleep not,
have always been one of the biggest mysteries in Rashar, and now we know that they are not limited to Rashar. The Sleepless actually exist across the entire Cosmere. And the big question now is, have we met any of these, or will we meet any of these Sleepless? I don't know. It seems like if Nikli was the best one at imitating humans, it's unlikely that someone, we missed someone with weird seams and tattoos across their face.
I think that there's a word of Brandon that there are Sleepless on other planets, but for various reasons, they are primarily situated on Rashar.
Got you. We could clearly pull out a bunch of quotes about the Sleepless, but this one stood out. Quote, "They are the guardians of life. They seek to prevent its end," end quote. Maybe giving like a mission statement for our Amians.
Yeah, I think that's just an interesting title to attach to them, as the guardians of life. Something to file away in the old brain. I do think it's interesting what they say about Dalinar, to sort of come back to that point from the beginning. They say, quote, "He has made the decision of honor. That is why he will destroy us. He is more dangerous now, not less," end quote. What the heck?
I don't know, but he did summon honor's perpendicularity. And in Dawnshard...
I know, but like we thought that making the decision of honor would be good.
Yeah, but the Amians are very conservative, or I see them as very conservative, so they wouldn't like any possible change.
I'm hoping that this doesn't foreshadow a reversal, like we've been talking about. Someone we think who is like doing the good and right thing, then ended up being the bad guy.
Another quote about the sleepless from Neekly is, quote, "As I and my kind are not native to this planet, we prefer the term hordlings," end quote, instead of kremlings.
Good to know that they are not native to Rashar. Just a good note there.
Could that be that they are native to Ashen? Maybe.
No, I'm going to say it goes way like bigger Cosmere than that. Yolen or something.
See, I think that Ashen at least makes some sense because that's why they're still mainly located on Rashar.
Like, I think they're mainly on Rashar because the Dawnshards are there.
That could be true. And they're, you know,
protecting
bad guardians of them. I mean, they let one get away, so not that great.
To be fair, they're not the original guardians.
That's what I'm saying. They're makeshift guardians.
Yeah, they're just like, all the Lancers are dead. Guess we better step in because we're the only other people in the Cosmere that know about the Dawnshards.
So I think that, yes, that could be why they have located themselves to protect the Dawnshards. That clearly makes sense. I think that there is also just the simplest answer of why are most of them there. It's because that's closest to their geographic homeland, and that they just came over from Ashen and maybe spread out. I know sometimes the boring answer is the
not
answer.
Right. I do want to make one more point about Rsyn. She is now required as the Dawnshard to never bind a Spren and become a Radiant. And I'm just curious as to why that would be like such a strong condition of their contract.
She is also not possessing the Dawnshard. Remember, the Dawnshard is a force that is now risen.
Right. She is possessed by the Dawnshard.
She is the Dawnshard. I don't even know if there is a difference between Rsyn and the force of the Dawnshard now. There is only one thing. There is Dawnshard Rsyn. You know, it's not a separate thing.
Yeah. And
what does that mean? We don't know, but it's a huge question.
Something interesting I thought was that the Sleepless say of Amia, essentially that Amia the way it is now should never have existed. It should have always been sort of a barren wasteland, but that the old Amians knew some way to make it a very verdant, lush place, supposedly through some devices that transformed Amia from a wasteland into this paradise, which immediately to me it sounded like Urithiru, which is this place where like nothing should grow, humans should not be able to live. They're like way up in the cold mountains where they should not be able to get food or sustain this huge population. But and yet at some point they were able to.
Fabrial mechanism.
And there are devices that are transforming this place into a habitable place. So that just like sent a little bell off in my brain.
And I think that lines up with what we know about Urithiru as well, is that as soon as the power or the organization that allowed for that spectacular ability to thrive but as soon as that goes away, everyone abandons Urithiru because like you can't survive there. Everyone abandons Amia because you can't survive there without this amazing either like a radiant power or fabrial power, some type of power that allows for these incredible changes to inhospitable areas.
And it sounds kind of cultivation-y.
Yeah, it
does.
Does.
Like, I wonder if there's something in there
she
where
pulled back from the world and maybe they lost the ability to...
Well, and we don't really know anything about cultivation's magic, really. It seems like maybe surge binding is a combination of cultivation and honor, but then there's like void binding, which is from odium. And does cultivation have her own thing? Maybe this is it.
On another note of things that the Sleepless say, which I feel like could be its own podcast, they talk about Chiri Chiri, giving us specifically the name or the title that Chiri Chiri falls under. One, they say that they had believed that all of the Larkin were extinct, that they had tried to breed some like knockoff Larkin with hordlings and regular Larkins that didn't work out and never grew.
Well, they have them. Those are the
Things that
little
suck.
Kremlings, yeah, that suck investiture, but they are definitely not the same thing as Larkins.
And they let us know that the Larkins were the guardians of ancient sins. That's the title.
Well, so this is interesting because the Sleepless actually call them the Ancient Guardians of Akina, or just the Ancient Guardians. The only place that we hear them called, quote, Ancient Guardian or Guardians of Ancient Sins, end quote, is from the Dawnshard. That is like a phrase that comes into Rsyn's brain when she's looking at the mural. The Sleepless don't actually call them that. So I think that is like an important distinction to make, that this guardian of ancient sin is a phrase that is not used, maybe not known by the Sleepless. I think that is an important distinction, because what exactly is the ancient sin? Is it referencing destroying ad nauseam? Is it just because these Dawnshards are like weapons? But then why is the Dawnshard calling itself ancient sin?
Let's bring it back to that connection to Nalthis and all of the different quotes that support the weird Dawnshard / Nalthian connection.
Yeah, we know that there is, well, many connections now between Rashar and Nalthis in many different ways, both through like humans trading knowledge and things like that. We referenced a word of Brandon a few episodes ago about the color of gemstones on Rashar being important to their powers.
And just keep in mind that from Shallan and the Lightweavers, we know that light and sound are intertwined and kind of one of the same thing. In the same respect, Rashar is most known as a planet of sounds and music, and Nalthis is a planet of light and color.
That brings it together because the awakening requires a verbal command, so sound, in addition to the color. So you like need both. And it seems like on Rashar the same thing is true. You need the color of the gemstone and some kind of intent.
So if we were going to create this uber connection between the planet and the shards, it would seem that Rashar and Nalthis fit under this Dawnshard that we have right now. And there would conceivably be two others somewhere. But I would at least say that like right now, it seems like the light planet
like
and the
2 of 4.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And so they're like the color and light planet is matched up with the sound planet and the shards therein. But isn't endowment and is there another shard on that planet?
No, it's just
one?
endowment.
Dang.
Yeah.
Okay, well we would need one more to make it I guess maybe Odium, but he's a strange one to fit in with that threesome.
Yeah, there are interesting connections, and then like we said about Rsyn taking the Dawnshard, there are a few other moments. For example, Lopen comments that, quote, the others called him silly, but he thought the different colors tasted different, end quote. He says that about like drinking in Stormlight from different colored gemstones. So another indication that maybe color is a player here.
What about the Rushu who is talking about how rubies can be used interchangeably and they have like a bunch of extra rubies?
Well, no, so that's usually rubies are used on span reeds. They're traditionally used for conjoined fabrials, but she says in this book that they can actually use amethysts as well, that they are not traditionally used, but they work just as well as rubies do.
And previously we had thought...
so interesting.
Yeah, it breaks a little bit.
Yeah, in all of the previous Ars Arcanums, when it's breaking down the different fabrials, it specifically indicates like rubies are used for conjoined fabrials. Heliodors are used for the person sensing fabrials. But it seems like that is not actually the case. And again, Brandon has kind of referenced this. Different gemstones can be different colors. Like we think of a sapphire as being blue, but you can have a pink sapphire, a white sapphire, you know. So it just makes me wonder how those like differences and variations are going to interact with the magic and the technology here on Roshar.
I think that the only thing I want to say before we sign off is a quick Hoid sighting, which we don't actually see Hoid.
Yes.
But someone mentions what we think is Hoid.
Yes.
And that's Cord, who says that the trickster god came through the pool, which we know is cultivation's perpendicularity, and warned the Horn-Eaters about the sleepless. We think that the trickster god is probably Hoid.
Yeah, it's been mentioned before that a person resembling Hoid at one point came out of the shard pool in the Horn-Eater Peaks, and the Horn-Eaters have taken him to be the trickster god.
I like that idea, a little Loki-esque.
Yeah. One thing that we definitely need to mention about Hoid is a fascinating word of Brandon that we found.
Breaking news? Okay, unless you're really nerdy, we are going to be breaking some news here.
It's a very recent word of Brandon.
We're recording this on November 8th, and the word of Brandon comes from November 6th. Now, you obviously are in the future, and you may have already heard this, but it is very new information from word of Brandon.
Quote, Hoid was a Dawnshard at some point in the deep past.
Stop quote. What? That's the answer, people. We've been wondering this for the entire time. What is Hoid? What's Hoid's deal? Why does Hoid do X, Y, Z? I'm sorry. Continue quote.
I mean, I think there's still
no speculation.
more to
Continue
Hoid, but
quote.
Continuing quote. And the reason he, even still, cannot physically harm people or even eat meat is related to the changes this made to his spirit.
Consider this the same fundamental principle as savanthood. Then he does go on to talk about Dragonsteel, which is his early work that's not part of the official Cosmere canon anymore, but some people have read it and had hints that Hoid was at one time a holder of a Dawnshard from that, but it is now more official, more canon, and probably the most important thing that we know didn't come out of Dawnshard, but came out of the words of Brandon about Dawnshard.
And he has Raphoed basically everything in regard to Dawnshards, because there's a lot that he says he is still like figuring out in terms of the Dawnshards, and so he doesn't want to canonize anything before he really solidifies it for himself. But another person asked if this would make Hoid a Dawn Sliver, and Brandon was like, I don't know if that's the words that I'm going to use, but like that's a good vocabulary for now. So Hoid is a Dawn Sliver.
This is mind-blowing, and we will probably have to do a whole Hoid-centric episode during our Rhythm of War breakdowns.
At least one.
I think that this is huge news, though, and the concept of a Dawn Sliver. So Rsyn, just to be clear, Rsyn is not a Dawn Sliver. She is the Dawnshard.
Yes.
And I would guess she's probably a different Dawnshard than Hoid. That's just my first guess. Hoid's Dawnshard, because it affected him not wanting to physically harm people or even eat meat, I would say his is probably something closer to like a preservation.
Yeah, or creation or something.
Where he just like by design can't end or destroy things or hurt things. So I don't necessarily think that this Dawnshard that we have learned about is the same one as Hoid. And I don't think Rsyn is the same as Hoid is right now. It's just important to kind of keep those connections separate.
So fascinating.
And we could go down the rabbit hole, but we've already had you for, I don't know, an hour and 30 minutes or more at this point. So we will wrap it up here and come back and revisit what the Dawnshards mean, what Hoid's role in Rhythm of War. We're going to come back and revisit all of those things in more detail later, but this has been your Breaking Hoid News update.
Let's wrap up with one quote just for fun. What is just something that you enjoyed reading, that made you laugh, that made you smile?
There were a couple of moments. Anytime that you have the Lopen as a main character, you're probably going to get some fun moments. But I actually think that what solidified my love of the Lopen was early on. And he has a lot of good moments at the end of the book. But early on, him and Kaladin share a moment that to me just like, it's the epitome. It is everything that is the Lopen. And Kaladin and Lopen are talking about that Reshi entourage with the prince that is arriving, and they have this conversation. Would you play along with me? Quote,
"They're not your cousins.
Herdaz is next to Reshi, so we're cousins.
Alethkar is next to Herdaz too," Kaladin said. "So I'm as much your cousin as those people are."
Lopen tapped him on the shoulder and winked. You're finally figuring it out, Goncho. Good job. I just love that. Like, that's obviously the point, dum-dum. Like, we're all cousins.
Yeah,
there are no differences between
great.
us. So perfect.
Also, we didn't get to this in this podcast, but shout out to Lopen's third ideal. Really loved that moment.
Any great moments for you or great quotes that you just want to pull out and talk about?
Another one from the Lopen, obviously. Quote, "Don't let people tell you that style is limited, pretending it will run out like Stormlight. Style is the best resource in the world because we can make as much of it as we want. And there's plenty, sure, for everybody." End quote. Good words to live by.
We have literally now just days. We're finally at the point when my comments make sense.
Yes.
Until Rhythm of War comes out.
Yeah. Plan for the podcast is to release one more episode as a quick recap of this theory we've briefly mentioned here and in other podcasts about music or sound cymatics theory on Rashar and in the Cosmere as a quick refresher for this newest Stormlight book.
That will probably be our last podcast that is 100% Rhythm of War spoiler free.
And also before our We're Reading Rhythm of War break.
So there will be a time period where we will not have new episodes, probably about a month. We are going to deliver that music theory podcast probably right around the time that Rhythm of War drops. Then expect a break, and then we will come back fully spoiled with Rhythm of War.
We'll see you on the other side, friends. Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.